Support for this podcast comes from the patrons at patreon.com/FMLFPL. Okay, welcome to another Fireside Chat. Today, I'm excited to have Aaron Moniz, data scientist and host of the Devils in the Details podcast. Aaron, how are you?
Pretty good. Happy to be here.
Hell yeah, dude. Right before the holidays, right before football's back, you just squeeze in a quick, Man United overview.
Well, this is pretty much all I do, so it's not really squeezing in so much as squeezing in the holidays to my Man United reviewing schedule.
True. Same here, basically. So let's just start with sort of like maybe an overview, sort of a first part of the season review from your perspective, from like a Man United fan perspective. Like, how are you feeling so far about Ten Hag and where the team's currently at, and just sort of give me that.
Sure. So, as you implied, right, new manager. After quite a downfall, I think, under Ole Gunnar Solskjaer that was not really fixed under Ralph Rangnick. And so a lot of what Ten Hag has done this season has had to do with kind of restoring the calmness or sort of saving the ship that he inherited. And as a result, there's been a number of signings. So, 5 players straight into the first 11 from transfers, I would say. I mean, I think Luke Shaw's kind of won his place back over Malacia, but the other 4 are regular starters in the team when they're fit. And as well as that, a couple of new faces, a young look for the team, a bit of a falling out with Ronaldo that has played a big role in how the season has gone so far. But overall, I think what we're seeing is signs of sort of, at this point, a conflict between, for anyone who's listening to me and listens to me regularly, you might notice that my voice is a little bit off. It's been quite a week. But a little bit of a sort of balancing act between what his current players are able to do and what idealistically he wants the squad to be able to do in the Premier League. Ten Hag is obviously a coach of highly possession-based football. Many people are familiar with the term positional play. I think it's vague, but United play positional play or are looking to in the long term now. And going from what Solskjaer and Jose Mourinho had been coaching at the club for the last 5 years to this sort of new style, the big change. And there's a lot of players and a lot of technical aspects that are not quite there yet. And as a result, Ten Hag has had to leverage between sort of compromising in areas where United are not ready yet to get results in the short term. Because there's no long term if you don't get results as Manchester United coach. And also build towards a longer term side, because if you just go full short term, you're never actually going to build to that goal that you're trying to build towards. Right. So those are kind of the main themes around United's season so far. And I actually think the second half of the season is going to look very different from the first half as a result, and including the World Cup that was put for a month in between.
Yeah, I mean that's a great way to sort of segue where more the fantasy focus would be for Manchester United. I mean, they have great fixtures. They play at every top 6 side already. And the teams that they haven't played are mostly very bad, mostly very winnable games, right? They haven't played against Forest, Wolves, Bournemouth, Crystal Palace, and Leeds yet. So, that's a pretty good list as far as, who you haven't played yet.
It's a good list of fixtures. And obviously, in general, in football, teams do well against worse teams than they do against better teams.
Exactly.
But one thing I will say is United's style is fundamentally quite well suited to playing the bigger teams. We saw this under Solskjaer as well. They've gotten results at every Big 6 team this year except for Man City. They, I'm pretty sure, scored in all of those games. And they scored 3 in the City game. And against some of the smaller teams, United have actually struggled to break them down a little bit. Especially with some of maybe a couple of misfiring forwards, some forwards who are more suited to playing in a perhaps counterattacking or transitional game than maybe, teams like City that can just break anyone down at will. So yeah, it's good to have favorable fixtures, but I wouldn't necessarily bank on United's forwards in particular performing better in these fixtures than they would in some of
Right.
those other games.
Yeah, I mean, that's super interesting because I was going to bring that up how, like, I don't really have the numbers up right now, but just in my head, I feel like conceding possession weirdly helps the United team. It's maybe just easier in general to just play on the counter, easier for players to like understand those concepts than the, like you said, like the high level Man City football. And so, what would you expect against maybe the quote unquote easier, more winnable fixtures, aka teams playing more conservatively and a lower block where Man United dominate possession? Like, how does that? Who do you expect to, push forward more than they have been, or how do you expect Man United to get the ball in the box? Who's going to get the shots? Like, who's going to get the chances? Like, how does that work?
Sure. So there's a couple of key themes. Number one is Anthony Martial needs to be fit. And given that he's the striker, until and if and when another striker is purchased in January, Martial is going to be starting up front. And Martial is key because he's the only player in that front line who can play the half of the game where he's not facing the goal. Players like Antony, Rashford, Elanga, Garnacho, they all struggle with that a little bit more than Martial does. And that allows United to safely maintain and progress the ball in the final third. Bruno Fernandes is United's best attacker, but he's not a particularly efficient carrier of the ball. And having Martial in the middle also helps with that. One big problem we saw when Bruno was playing with Ronaldo is that neither of them can carry the ball at this stage in Ronaldo's career. So when the ball goes into those central areas, it often gets lost because Bruno's obviously a great creator, but not secure. And Ronaldo has obviously aged a little bit and isn't quite as good as he used to be. So, I mean, that's an understatement. But anyway, point being, Martial really helps the attack. And I think Martial will help to some extent in breaking down those teams. But also, there's a chance that Martial tends to struggle against those types of opposition because as much as his technical game is fantastic, his actual getting into goal scoring positions can be less than great. So I'd expect Martial to be super important, but I'm not sure if that'll show up in the goals and assists.
Yeah, almost more in like a build-up way than an actual goal-scoring way, because he is interesting in fantasy. I mean, he's cheap, he's fit until he's not, and everyone's kind of looking at the fixtures, being like, "All right, like it's Tony time," like let's go, But I that's interesting to hear. I hadn't really realized that, but I guess even in the cup match today, you saw a bit of that. Like
for sure. Yeah, he totally changes the team. In terms of output, though, I think I'd be, from an FPL perspective, looking at Rashford. He's the same price as Martial from what I'm looking at. And I expect him to probably score and assist more than Martial. Bruno is going to be most likely the highest goals plus assists of any United player. He's the penalty taker now.
Huge.
He is. He's the chief creator. I think if you looked at expected numbers or underlyings, he's probably the highest. If you looked at past year goal involvements, he's probably the highest. But he's obviously really expensive, and I don't think he's necessarily as good as other midfielders in that price bracket FPL.
Right. Yeah.
And then Antony's overpriced. I mean, I think he's a good player, but he's overpriced.
Yeah, I was going to ask about Antony. I mean, in a weird way, like some guys translate directly to FPL, like a Bruno, for example, right? He's just really good at all the stuff that you want someone to be good for in FPL, and he has the numbers to get it, and he scores lots of points. Like, it's very simple, right? Antony is a guy where, like, I feel like watching him can be a little bit more frustrating, but for FPL, it actually translates positively because, he loves a shot. Like he shoots for fun, right? He just pulls up from 20 yards out and tries to curl one. There's no negative points in fantasy for missing shots or making bad decisions if he just rips them all the time and you just get the points. So like, what do you expect? And also it's weird because I feel like in my head, I'm like, yeah, Anthony's been there the whole season. He's played 6 games in the league. So I'm like, that's crazy. Like, I don't even know who he is yet. Like, I don't even know what he's going to do against these in the bad teams and the good fixtures. Like, maybe he breaks them down, right? So what do you think about him going forward?
Well, for what it's worth, 6 games, 28 points is pretty good.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm about to say things that maybe would perhaps dissuade people from purchasing Antony as an asset,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
his return's been pretty good from an FPL perspective. Yeah, he is a very good shooter, especially in that zone of like the right half, just outside the box. He's probably one of
Yeah.
the best in the world from that range.
It's like the NBA elbow or something.
Yeah, exactly. It's weird because I normally really don't like players shooting from that range. It usually doesn't result in goals, but
It's
Antony has
bad.
pretty good success.
Yeah, like it's bad in terms of XG. Like it's just factually bad. But yeah, he's always been above his XG and like scores well from there. So
Yeah, and if you look at the shot maps, I mean, most of his overperformance is from that region, right?
right.
The sort of other with Antony is, again, in the big games, he does kind of tend to get behind and get these chances behind, and I think his movement off the ball is a little bit underrated as a whole. But largely, I feel like Antony's game is quite far away from the goal. He plays
Okay.
really wide. And he really looks to stretch the pitch and occupy fullbacks 1v1. And that's what most of his value comes from, which means
Okay.
that he often doesn't get the final goal or assist. But that doesn't diminish his value. It just means that I don't necessarily think he's going to continue to score at the rate he is now. I think he scored in each of his first 4 games, or he scored 4 in his
Something
first 4
like that.
games.
Yeah.
And that's not likely to continue, I would say. I don't expect him to finish the season with 15 Premier League goals.
Right.
So my caution with Antony would be, ultimately, I think Rashford is cheaper, and I expect Rashford to score more. Rashford's form means that he's going to start every game at this point, and Sancho is out of shape, I'm pretty sure, so I don't think he's going to be playing. There's not really any competition.
Yeah, Rashford is clearly like the pick of the litter, and I think the FPL ownership
from a midfielder
will
forward
reflect
perspective.
that. Yeah, like for sure, and with the price, like you said, and everything. So it's for a lot of this podcast, it's almost, I mean, for me at least, and I think a lot of the listeners, it's almost like who else? We're gonna have Rashford. We have unlimited transfers right now because of the post World Cup. So it's sort of like, are we going to double up with Bruno or Antony or maybe Dalot or something? We'll get to the defense later. But I did want to double back on Bruno a little bit because it does sort of seem like a role change, from the bits and pieces that I've watched. I'm curious what you think. Like his XG's down, his touches in the final third's down, shots are down, stuff like that. But he's still doing like a lot of ball progression, elite creativity. It seems like he's sort of like winning more tackles. Is it a transition from like more of a 10 to an 8 and he's required to do more work, or how do you see that?
Maybe. Honestly, I don't really expect it to persist. I expect Bruno to start getting involved in a lot of goals. Firstly, like I said, he's taking penalties. Secondly, a lot of United's earlier matches were kind of struggling to get goals. A lot of those games against the big 6 teams were kind of like scoring once and then not really doing that much else. I expect Bruno to be the conductor in the final third. I expect him to be getting in the box a lot more than he has been. I don't really think him dropping deep to facilitate ball progression is either his best game or how he can provide the most value to this current team. So I think it's just one of those quirks that happens when a team hits a certain stretch of form, or a certain combination of players where he kind of just dropped off a little bit in output. I would be surprised if Bruno finished the season he's probably on something between a quarter and a third of an expected goal involvement per 90. I'd probably expect him to finish closer to half than a third, which is what he's been in the last few seasons. So, in other words, I'd be expecting returns every 2 weeks plus penalties.
No, I mean that makes a lot of sense. Like picturing in my head, like the goals they scored against like Liverpool and Arsenal and stuff. It's like one out ball to Rashford running onto it or Antony running onto it. Right? It's not like sustained pressure and possession dominant. And I feel like that's where maybe Bruno will shine in these games. So yeah, I like that as an asset. He's definitely like on my mind from an FPL perspective.
His price has dropped just a little bit, such that I think he's now a little bit cheaper than the guys like, I don't know, Son, De Bruyne.
Yeah, he's a lot cheaper than them. Yeah.
Yeah. So it might be worth a shot if he sort of hits that run. I do think he will be taking penalties now permanently, which is like,
I mean, it's
I've said that 3 times now.
historically huge for Man United, but not this year so far.
It's
But
huge for FPL.
yeah, I did look back at, because I was just sort of like curious. Like Martial drew 4 penalties in 1,500 minutes in 2020. I was like, that's good. You know, he's fit. Maybe he's going to be drawing penalties. I feel like Rashford, Antony are the type of guys that would draw penalties, you know, like moving at pace with the ball into the box, you know, so maybe there'll be an uptick.
Penalty stats were a little bit lucky. Like if I remember, I think Dan James and Brandon Williams and
there were
a couple others that won a lot of penalties too. But I mean, I know I said it 3 times, but I feel like in FPL, it's one of those things that like Jorginho was Chelsea's top scorer. You know,
it is. It's huge. You know, there's a reason we have like Mo and Holland and, you know, Kane. Like they're the best players in the game.
That's one thing he definitely has over guys like Son and De Bruyne is that he is gonna, like, those guys won't take them. Those you're depending fully on their production and open play. And they do have dry patches, like even the best players, right? Sometimes the shots don't go in. And that's what it is. But yeah, so there are definitely reasons why I might have Bruno on a short list. Right now, I'm not sure if I'd go straight in for him, but
and then last sort of question about the attack, I think, is just Garnacho. I mean, everyone's getting really excited about him. He looks good. He's probably not a pick in fantasy, but I'm more wondering, like, is he going to eat into other guys' minutes? Like, is he going to take minutes from Rashford, or is Rashford going to play the 9 when Martial needs a rest and Garnacho plays left wing? Or is he going to play left wing and move Rashford to right wing where he's maybe less effective? You know, like, what do you see about Garnacho's rest of the season?
Yeah, so I already said Sancho's gone, and he seems to have surpassed Elanga in the pecking order, which makes him the first sub right now. I do think the front 3 that starts is kind of a staple.
Okay,
but I'm looking at Garnacho's price right now, and it's 4.3. So at that price, I mean, if you only have 2 United players, you might as well take a gamble.
It's not bad,
but I don't know if there are many midfielders who are cheaper in the game.
If there's one Martial injury, and it might just be Garnacho left wing and Rashford at the 9, right? And then it's like unbelievable pick. So
yeah, and he, like, in fairness, as far as forcing your way into the team goes, he was doing a good job. He had a couple goal involvements before the World Cup. He's obviously scored that last-minute winner before the World Cup started. I don't necessarily think he's a bit of a strange player because a lot of, I think, his youth level involvement was his ability to run with the ball. He's very quick. He's very good with his feet, but he didn't really have a clear release end product method. He just scored a lot because he was so good at the running part. Whereas now I think a little bit more of his involvement in this team, and even today in the EFL Cup game, was getting on the end of passes and getting him behind a little bit. And I think if he can do that, he could probably be a pretty reliable, right now, squad player level goal involvement guy. Something James, which, I mean, Dan James he's better than Dan James, but Dan James's goal involvement, if you look at his time at United, was actually pretty good. He scored something in the region of about 8 or 9 goals and then another 5 or 6 assists over 2 seasons, which, considering the minutes he played, is decent.
I don't rate the player, but being absurdly quick and fast is useful, right? And having an engine that never stops.
I think comparing them as players would be a disservice to Garnacho. I think in terms of James's output, he was actually getting pretty solid goal output. So I would expect similar from Garnacho if he's playing that kind of role instead of the role where he's dropping deep to get on the ball and run at teams.
Yeah. So how do Man United improve an attack? I mean, you said that maybe, these lower block teams have not traditionally been, their way home. This season they've scored a lot on the break against the big team. So what are the tactical advances? Like, what do you expect from a Ten Hag coach team to improve on to ultimately improve from, their 8th in non-penalty XG per 90 right now? Like, how do they get more towards the top of the table there?
Yeah, well, number 1 is fitness. Like you said, Antony hasn't played much. Martial hasn't played much. Those are probably 2 of United's 3 best attackers, if you're not counting Bruno. Those are two of the three best members of the front three. Yeah, so that's number one, right? If those guys stay fit, they're going to produce more. Number two is out of possession stuff. So Ten Hag has been absolutely drilling the press. He's talked about it in interviews. United's players are essentially trying to execute a way more complex out of possession approach than they have before, which is one, going to force more errors from the opposition, but two, going to take some time for players to get used to. So I expect that to continue, sort of one of those things that just like implicitly keeps getting better over time.
Yeah, it's like a steady improvement, or is it sort of something clicks?
A little bit of both, right? Because it's like one mistake can undo an entire press.
Yeah.
So if, for example, one thing we've seen a lot is United, and this is under Rangnick, a huge issue. The United will execute a pressing move to get the ball to go back to the opposition goalkeeper. The keeper has the ball, and then someone like Bruno or Rashford presses the goalkeeper, and that opens up the entire pitch behind them for the ball to go through. So that's not an issue of the entire system. That's an issue of one player making a mistake.
Right.
So it is, to some extent, sometimes something clicks. Like that Spurs game when United hit, I think it was like 30 shots on Lloris.
Oh my God.
That was totally like the press clicking, right?
Yeah.
But then on the other hand, it is also kind of a gradual thing where, those one-off instances might lead to a goal, but they might not. And over time, right, the difference between, 2 or 3, and then if you improve, you might have 5 successful presses, and then you might have 10. So that improvement is gradual. There's obviously the most obvious answer, which is methods and possession to create. You saw today the goal from a cutback. That's something I'd really like to see more often. That's stuff we haven't seen from United a lot. Yeah, I know.
That was insane.
I won't expect to see it a lot from Wan-Bissaka, but I expect to see it more often in general.
Yeah.
And then number 4 is hitting the market, right? Garnacho and Elanga as 4th and 5th choice options is not really an option for a team like United at this stage of competitiveness, right? They're both good players. They're good prospects, but relying on them to contribute is both a disservice to them and the team because they don't have the experience to be considered regular contributors.
Especially with Martial's injury record, it just seems
with Martial's injury record.
And Anthony
didn't join until the end of the.
Right?
I don't think with Anthony it's less injuries and more the fact that he joined on essentially deadline week.
Yeah, I'm just looking back at like the last 2 seasons with Ajax. Like he only played 1,700 league minutes both years, and
That's true.
I don't really follow Ajax. I'm not sure if that's injury or whatever.
Yeah,
but maybe there's something there.
I can't speak to that, but I don't think injuries ate up the majority of his minute missing at United so far. And then. Yeah, and Ronaldo obviously left, so there's a big minutes hole. There's a big minutes hole in the team though. Like ultimately, he ate up a lot of minutes. I think he played close to 1,000 minutes this season, and last season he played every game. So that's a big hole to replace in terms of where are my minutes coming from. He left, Cavani left, Pogba left. Like James had gone before that. So this has gone from being a really bloated attack, Lingard, a really bloated attack with a lot of players who can play minutes to, 3 senior starters, really. And hopefully we'll see Sancho again at some point of the season. So I think United will buy a striker in January. I'm expecting someone like a low price. I think the shrewd move would be something like Memphis Depay or Marcus Thuram. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Depay Thuram. Someone who's going to cost like 10 million ultimately, but
high wages but low fee and just like fills the slot. Yeah
exactly. Yeah, so that's what I would expect them to be looking for. I don't think they can really afford or coax another team into a big move. So yeah, that's
I know
that's
everyone
what
keeps talking about Osimhen, and I'm like, why would Napoli sell him right now? They're balling out.
It's just the wrong time, right?
It's just the wrong time. Yeah,
they're in the Champions League knockout stages as well.
Yeah,
and they look like a lot of people have been saying they're one of the favorites. So
I mean, I wouldn't be, in the mix. Yeah.
Yeah, I would be surprised if they were to sell Osimhen, and I'd be surprised if United were to shell out 100 million in January. But just someone who is quite good.
Yeah.
Add something different and can eat up minutes will make a huge difference. I think a player like Thuram or Memphis would totally change the sort of overall skill set of this attack. Thuram's really good off the ball, really, really good at facilitating high quality shots. That's something that none of United's forwards currently do against a settled defense.
Right.
Memphis is a lot like Martial, but I think he's just probably a level higher. So he's
Your
really good at hold up.
Would pop off if you guys got Memphis, huh?
For sure, yeah. I'd have a very happy co-host.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, so I think either of those would be great. I wouldn't be surprised to see them go for something like Cody Gakpo. I don't really think that's the right stylistic fit, but I think he's a good player. But yeah, I think those are the biggest, like, make additions, keep the players fit, get better at executing the plan. And that's a really vague answer. Obviously, that's what you say for anything.
It's real. No, I appreciate that. I mean, I think that's just the truth. And then defensively, so Dalot is a super, super popular pick. He's just been getting assists. He gets a lot of bonus points. Man United have been pretty decent for clean sheets, which is like really the bread and butter of defender points in FPL. I mean, this one, it's less straightforward, but around 8th in non-penalty XG against per 90. Again, it's been a tough schedule, so maybe that will lead to more cleans down the road. But also Varane and Lissandro maybe on a break, World Cup break or something like that.
I think that's a bit of a. I think that's a bit of a misrepresentation, to be honest, because what really happened is United got battered in about 3 games. Brentford, Brighton,
first 2,
and Man
right?
City.
Oh, and Man City, right.
So those 3 games, they conceded like probably over 25% of that XG.
Yeah, that's fair.
So I broadly think United's XG has actually been quite good. I think, or I mean defensively. I think it's one of those where you would see that in most games, United have conceded 0 or 1 goal. I think outside those 3, there hasn't been a single game that was in the Premier League that was conceded more than 1 goal. And I think there have been a fair few
the recent Villa one, but that was kind of those were kind of crazy, like worldies anyway. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. So I think the defenders are good assets. I expect the first choice backline to be Dalot, Martinez, Varane, Shaw, when fit. Shaw is probably the most likely to get goal involvements, but the least likely to be fit. So, and obviously also the most likely to be rotated. Like I think Malacia is the closest to, and I've just seen Malacia is also really cheap. So if Shaw does get injured, that's a really good pick, I think. But yeah, I do think Dalot is probably the best pick. Dalot, the other thing that's exciting is like he's been consistently getting better, I think. His adaptation to the system. The fullbacks have a pretty complex role in this system, and I think Dalot is really well suited to it. He's really good at coming into midfield, and he's getting better. The part he's getting better at is the final third actions. Like, I think the one thing about Dalot's game that a lot of people haven't realized is that he's not really a decisive player in the final third. He's technically very good. Like, he's a good passer. He's a good carrier. But his final ball striking is often like just in the wrong zone, overhit, underhit. And I think that's the type of thing that you can fix if you have good technique. And I think as you get more used to a system, more used to repeating actions where like, Anthony pulls wide, Dalot runs behind, the ball goes behind, Dalot hits it first time. Those actions are things that you see with United a lot. That I think Dalot will become more effective in the final third as a result of. So I would expect there's a lot of variance in these things because fullbacks don't actually get involved in goals that much, but I would expect him to create more chances than he did.
Well, it does
in
seem
the first
like
half of the season.
Also, in these I keep saying easier matches, but you know what I mean. It's like there's more opportunities for more players to get forward, right? There's more opportunities for overloads and stuff like that. It's better for the fullbacks. Like they should be less defensive. They should be overlapping more with dominating possession and getting balls into the box and whatnot. So yeah, I think Shaw and Dalot offer value there, but I am worried, and maybe you're going to say I shouldn't be worried about let's just say because it's basically everyone has 3 matches in a week. It's like a pile up as soon as we get back, and no Varane and no Alessandro potentially in those matches. So it's probably like Maguire and Lindelof. I'm less confident in the immediacy of the clean sheets, and then after those, it's Man City and Arsenal. So then, just from like sort of a more short term perspective, that doesn't seem good to me for clean sheets.
Mixed feelings.
Okay.
I honestly don't know to what extent Lindelof and Maguire will hurt in these games.
Okay.
They were largely, like, if you look at the records under Solskjaer for the 2 full seasons, Lindelof and Maguire actually kept a lot of clean sheets.
Yeah.
I think they generally did quite well. Lindelof has very clear weaknesses in his game. Maguire has not been at his best for a long time, but I think when you look at the opposition United are going to play, Nottingham Forest, Wolves, who have had, I think, the worst goal-scoring record in the Premier League.
They have like 4 goals. It's ridiculous. Yeah.
I mean, they just replaced managers, so it's hard to project where they'll be, but yeah. Bournemouth. I really think I don't think it would be foolish to bet on a clean sheet.
Okay.
In Premier League, you never know, but
yeah, of course. And clean sheets are
I
kind
do think
of
with
random.
Lindelof and Maguire. Yeah, exactly. I do think with Lindelof and Maguire, you'd have a good shot. I would not go with De Gea, is what I would say. He's quite pricey, and I don't back him to face a lot of shots.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah,
Okay.
Lindelof and Maguire would obviously be less likely to keep clean sheets than Alessandro and Varane. But I don't think it's a doomsday scenario, put it that way. It's not like last year there were times when, Phil Jones and you were seeing like McTominay at center back. And I mean, and to their credit, like they all stepped in reasonably well, considering the circumstances. But with Lindelof and Maguire, they're both seasoned professionals who like have played 100 professional games together. So.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's fair. All right. Well, good to hear. All right. I mean, fantasy perspective, that's pretty much all the players that I think I and others are looking at. I mean, is there anything else that you think is worth bringing up, maybe from the Man United perspective, or should we wrap this up?
Let me take a quick look here.
Yeah,
at some of the other assets.
Yeah, there's just not many, right? DMs and stuff like that don't really get points in fantasy, and
yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, how much is Casemiro? He's 4.9. Yeah, I wouldn't bother.
I mean, there's Eriksen, I guess. I mean, he's kind of a weird one, right? Because he's like a tweener a little bit.
Actually,
but like he's gonna be on corners. He'll probably take a decent amount of free kicks. Maybe he'll push forward in these games.
Yeah, he scored today, but I'd spend the extra on Rashford. I think. Yeah, I guess the only other thing would be that I actually think Varane and Martinez will be back for some of these games.
Oh, okay.
So I'm pretty sure they'll be back for the Bournemouth game. I would have to think, which is in 2 weeks.
I guess it's like manager to manager. How much time they let them take off or something like that. I don't really know.
I think they've all had 1 week at United. Okay. So I think it's been because Eriksen played today. He got eliminated in the group stage. Casemiro started. He got eliminated in the quarterfinal.
Right.
And there are a couple others. Martial.
Well, the England
Antony,
players too. Yeah.
Yeah. So the England players, the Brazil players all played. Except for Maguire.
Yeah.
And Eriksen played. Like United's entire starting 11, except for Martial, was at the World Cup. Yeah. So I wouldn't be surprised to see Alessandro and Varane back sooner than you think. I'm not sure if I think Alessandro went to Argentina, so maybe not him.
Yeah, he's partying in the streets. His underwear's on his head.
I don't think they'll be back for Boxing Day, but after that, it's a toss-up, which could be a bad thing as well, right? I mean, that's probably a red flag for going for Lindelof or Maguire.
I don't think they're picks. It's more like if you go for the fullbacks, can you expect the cleans, right? Yeah. So it's like
and Dalot's also got a fitness doubt.
Yeah, I'm looking at Shaw. Maybe maybe a little bit of a differential with Dalot's fitness. So
Yeah, my only concern there would be that they didn't play today. really.
Yeah.
I mean, Malacia, Shaw, Dallo all got eliminated in the quarterfinal.
Yeah.
And only Malacia played today. So
Right.
that
Maybe
would
it's
be
a
my
stay
only
away.
concern. But yeah,
All right,
it seems
man.
like it's just Rashford.
Yeah, I mean, it's Rashford for sure for my team, but then like I'm very Bruno curious, Anthony
I'm glad.
curious, Martial curious. So we'll see.
I'm glad I could provide some great insight over this hour. Just a 45-minute podcast, and I mean, you could have just run the record button. And I just said Rashford, and then
Rashford,
you're like, "Okay,
that's
we're
it.
good. Subscribe."
Yeah. We'll see. Maybe like it depends. It's like if you're a fan or not is how you interpret everything that you're saying, right? It's like people who listen who are Man United supporters are probably like, oh, I'm getting all these guys that they're talking about. And people who hate Man United are like, I'm not having any of this. This sounds terrible.
Yeah,
So.
I mean, for what it's worth, I don't have Rashford in my team, but
It's time to step it up, Aaron. Well, yeah, man. Thanks so much for coming on the pod, doing this. Where can people find you on the internet, listen to you, and all that stuff?
Sure, I do about a million different things, both on and off the internet. Well, on the internet related to football for the most part. I think the center of all the stuff I do is Moniz Football on Twitter. That's AMONIZ Football. From there, you'll find my podcast. I do a Man United podcast every week. We'll probably start up again next week. Devil's in the Details. I think it's one of the best things I've ever contributed to the football space, if not the best. We really put a lot of work into making it really good. So, and we wanted to make a United podcast that was sort of different to what a lot of the other ones do. So I'm really passionate about that. And yeah, if you could give that a listen, and you can find me on Twitter for anything else.
Awesome, man. Thanks. Cheers.
Thank you.